What happens when Hope decides to run for office? Hi there, I'm Chris with a K, and welcome back to This Week in Queer History, where we celebrate queer moments and icons that I wish I had known about as a young gay kid growing up in conservative America. Have you ever wondered how we went from a handful of out officials to breaking the lavender ceiling? With more than 1,300 LGBTQ elected leaders? Well, grab your favorite pride flag, because we're going to chronicle the rainbow wave that all started with Harvey Milk.
This week in queer history, stories told with love and glee.
So let's rewind to a time before rainbow pins and campaign buttons with trans flags on them. For most of American history, queerness and politics existed in separate galaxies. Politicians whispered the word gay only in scandals or sermons. But even then, in the corners of city councils and grassroots meetings, a few brave souls were cracking open the closet door, one vote at a time. Before Harvey Milk even pinned a campaign button on his lapel, there was Jose Sarria, a drag performer, a World War II veteran, and an absolute trailblazer. In 1961, Sarria did something almost unthinkable. He ran for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, openly as a gay man. He didn't win, but that wasn't the point. He proved something seismic, that queer people could be visible, vocal, and political. His campaign taught the establishment that the queer vote existed and could not be ignored. And then came the early 1970s, a decade when activism spilled into everything, including politics. In Ann Arbor, Michigan, a 21-year-old student named Kathy Kozanchenko was recruited by the Human Rights Party. She ran openly as a lesbian and won her election on April 2nd, 1974, making her the first openly LGBTQ person in U.S. history to win public office. She was 21. I can't imagine what that must have felt like, stepping into that position at that age with the whole world saying, "Are you sure?" And she said back, "Yeah, watch me." She focused on rent control and economic justice, and she wasn't just focused on gay rights. She was showing the world that queer candidates, they were leaders. Around the same time, two other heroes, Jerry DeGrake and Nancy Wexler, also from Ann Arbor, came out while already serving on the city council. It was 1973, and they both just said, "Yeah, we're gay." Just like that. And it sounds so simple now, but that act was radical then. It wasn't just a press release, it was a proclamation. They became the first elected officials in the US to publicly identify as gay while in office, showing that coming out wasn't just a personal act. It was a political one, too. And then there was Elaine Noble, running for the Massachusetts House of Representatives in 1974. She won, becoming the first openly gay or lesbian person elected to a state legislature. Her campaign office was vandalized, and she got hate mail, but she stood firm. Imagine being one of the only queer people in a room full of lawmakers and still saying, "Excuse me, I have a bill to introduce." Elaine did that. She reminded people that representation is resilience. By the 1970s, these pioneers had done more than win elections. They'd planted seeds. They'd proven that being out didn't make you unelectable. It made you undeniable. Then came Harvey. Harvey Bernard Milk was born in Woodmere, New York in 1930. He was the grandson of Lithuanian Jewish immigrants, a Navy veteran, and by all accounts, a man who refused to fit into the neat little box society handed him. After serving in the Navy during the Korean War and being forced to resign because of his sexuality, Milk bounced from careers. Teacher, insurance analyst, theater producer, but it wasn't until he moved to San Francisco in the early 1970s that he found his calling. He and his partner Scott Smith opened Castro Camera in the heart of what would become ground zero for the gay liberation movement, the Castro District. The shop wasn't just a business, it was a community hub. If Stonewall was the riot that sparked the movement, Castro Camera was the living room that kept it alive. By 1973, Harvey decided to run for San Francisco Board of Supervisors. The establishment told him to wait his turn. "No thanks, I'll take my turn now." He lost, but then he ran again, and again, and again. And finally, in 1977, when San Francisco switched to district-based elections, Harvey Milk won. He became the first openly gay man elected to public office in California. What made Milk different wasn't just that he was gay, it was that he was joyful about it. He didn't run from his identity, he ran with it, with courage. His campaign wasn't about fear, it was about hope. He used to say, "You gotta give him hope," and people listened. Milk's platform was simple: fairness, equality, and the belief that government should work for everyone, including the weirdos, the dreamers, and the drag queens. He built coalitions with labor unions, seniors, and racial minorities, proving that a gay candidate could win through solidarity, not segregation. Once elected, Harvey immediately made history again. He sponsored and passed San Francisco's first gay rights ordinance, which banned discrimination based on sexual orientation in housing, employment, and public accommodations. The board passed it 10-1, with Dan White, a name that would later haunt history, casting the sole no vote. Milk wasn't just legislating, he was galvanizing. He campaigned fiercely against California's Proposition 6, the Briggs Initiative, which would have banned gay and lesbian teachers from working in public schools. He stormed across the state, delivering fiery speeches with lines like, "If a bullet should enter my brain, let that bullet destroy every closet door." Tragically, that line would become prophecy. On November 27th, 1978, Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone were assassinated by Dan White. White, a disgruntled former supervisor, walked into City Hall with a gun and ended 2 lives that had changed the course of history. The city erupted. The candlelight march that followed stretched for miles, a river of grief, but also a declaration. Harvey's voice had become everyone's. Milk's death wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning of a movement. The world had seen what was possible, and you can't unsee hope once you've seen it. The 1980s were a storm. AIDS swept through queer communities like wildfire, while politicians pretended not to notice. President Ronald Reagan didn't even utter the word AIDS publicly until the late 80s, after thousands had died. But even in the face of devastation, queer political power grew. Out of the ashes came voices that refused to be silent. ACT UP, Queer Nation, and local leaders who learned that politics wasn't just about passing laws, it was about saving lives. In 1981, a congressman from Massachusetts named Barney Frank entered the U.S. House of Representatives. He was brilliant, he was sarcastic, and closeted, at least for a while. But then in 1987, amid the AIDS crisis, he came out publicly, and he became the first openly gay member of Congress. That took guts. He once joked that he came out because it was better than being found out. But his coming out wasn't a punchline, it was a lifeline for so many Americans who had never seen someone like him wield that kind of power. Frank fought for housing equality, civil rights, and later he co-authored the Dodd-Frank Act, one of the most significant financial reforms in history. He proved that you could be openly gay and still shape the economic foundation of the nation. It was a statement. Gay men weren't just side characters in culture, they were central figures in governance. But politics in the 1980s was still a minefield. Many local governments repealed gay rights ordinances under pressure from the religious right. Cities like St. Paul, Wichita, and Eugene rolled back protections. The same decade that gave us Madonna's Like a Virgin also gave us moral panic. And still, through that pain, new leaders emerged. City council members, state legislators, activists turned politicians, and they were all ready to rebuild. The lesson of the 1980s was brutal, but clear. If we didn't have a seat at the table, we were on the menu. So by the 1990s, the conversation began to shift. queer visibility in media started to rise. This is when Ellen was about to come out on TV, Will and Grace wasn't far behind, and politically, the tides were changing. In 1992, Althea Garrison was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, becoming the first known transgender person to serve in a U.S. state legislature. Her story is complex. She was outed by the media against her will. She lost her re-election bid, and only decades later, she embraced her legacy openly. But she broke barriers nonetheless. Her win was a quiet revolution, one that said trans people belonged in the conversation, even when the world wasn't ready to listen. That same decade brought us Christine Quinn, who rose through New York City politics to become the city council's first openly gay and first female speaker in 2006. Meanwhile, Ambassador Jim Hormel, appointed by President Clinton in 1999, became the first openly gay U.S. ambassador. The Senate stalled his confirmation for years because of his sexuality. Finally, he won. He once said, "I never asked for tolerance. I demanded respect." That's power. And then there was Anise Parker, the future mayor of Houston. In 1997, she won her first citywide race, and by 2009, she became the first openly gay mayor of a major American city. Houston. This is Texas, the fourth largest city in the country, elected a lesbian mayor. Progress wasn't always linear, but sometimes it made leaps. So by the end of the 1990s, public opinion was shifting. Polls showed rising support for same-sex partnership, civil unions entered into public debate, and for the first time, queer candidates weren't anomalies, they were part of the political landscape. If the 70s were about visibility and the 80s were about survival, the 2000s were about legitimacy. We weren't asking to be seen anymore, we were demanding to be heard. In 2008, a small Oregon town made history when voters elected Stu Rasmussen as the first openly transgender mayor in the United States. Silverton wasn't San Francisco or New York. It was a small town, and its people chose authenticity over fear. Rasmussen showed up unapologetically, dresses, heels, and all, and governed with competence and compassion. That's how hearts change, one local election at a time. A few years later, in 2015, Kate Brown became the first openly bisexual governor in American history. She stepped into Oregon's top job after the previous governor resigned, and then she won it on her own right. For decades, bisexual politicians had been erased or doubted, but Kate Brown didn't just survive that, she thrived. Her leadership on voting rights and healthcare expansion redefined what inclusive governance looks like. And then came Kirsten Sinema. Love her or hate her or just tweet about her outfit choices, she made history in 2018 as the first openly bisexual person elected to the U.S. Senate. Her victory in Arizona was monumental, proof that queer identity could coexist with political complexity. Representation doesn't have to look one way. The 2000s also saw international ripples. In Iceland, and please forgive my Icelandic, Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir became the world's first openly gay head of government in 2009. In Luxembourg, Xavier Bettel became prime minister in 2013, later marrying his husband while in office. These leaders reminded us that queer politics wasn't just an American story. It was a human one. And then came the rainbow wave. In 2012, Tammy Baldwin shattered another ceiling by becoming the first openly gay U.S. senator. She was from Wisconsin, the heartland, and she won by talking about healthcare, jobs, and fairness. She didn't just make history, she made progress tangible. 5 years later in Virginia, a journalist named Danica Roem ran for state office. Her opponent had authored a bill to ban trans people from using certain restrooms. Danica didn't waste time debating her identity. She talked about fixing traffic, and she won. She became the first openly transgender person elected to and serving in a U.S. state legislature. When asked how she handled the transphobia, she smiled and said, "I'm a journalist. I deal in facts." That's the kind of grace politics needs. That same year, Minneapolis elected Andrea Jenkins, a Black transgender woman, to its city council. Andrea's election wasn't just symbolic, It was transformational. She brought poetry, art, and intersectionality into the city's political bloodstream. For queer people of color, she was proof that the table was finally getting bigger. By 2020, Sarah McBride won her race in Delaware, becoming the first openly transgender state senator in the nation. A decade earlier, she'd come out publicly while interning at the White House. Now she's making laws. Her first bill, expanding healthcare access and protecting LGBTQ youth. That's a full circle moment. By the mid-2020s, the numbers were astonishing. More than 1,300 openly LGBTQ officials were serving across the United States. Governors, senators, judges, mayors, school board members, from the local to the federal level. That's not a wave anymore. That's a tide. Each of these milestones tells a story, but together they tell a truth. Politics isn't just about policy, it's people. And queer politicians have always brought something uniquely powerful to the table. Empathy forged by struggle, humor born from survival, and a belief that change is possible because they've lived it. Harvey Milk would say, hope will never be silent. And now hope has microphones, ballots, and cabinet positions. Some of my earliest memories of politics starts with my mom. She wasn't a politician, but she had that kind of fire in her, the kind that makes you believe a single vote could change the world. She'd speak openly about politicians when she would be watching TV, and she'd talk about women's rights, equality, and justice like they were family members, and she refused to let anyone talk badly about them. I can still remember an election day, and she'd gather all of us kids up, and we had headed to the polls with her, and she was making sure that her vote counted. And I remember the pride on her face as she dropped her ballot into the box, that quiet satisfaction of doing her part. Watching her, I learned that participation wasn't just a right, but it was a responsibility, and maybe even an act of love. As I got older, the sense of purpose stayed with me, but I also met people who told me they didn't bother voting because it doesn't make a difference or it doesn't matter. And I also get that. I understand. When progress feels slow or power seems rigged against you, cynicism can start to feel easier than hope. But every time I've given up on something that mattered, it never made the world better. It just made me feel smaller inside. That's why stories like Harvey Milk's always hit me deep inside. Here was just an ordinary guy, a camera shop owner with a bullhorn and a dream. He decided to show up again and again, even when the system told him no. But by showing up, he cracked something open in history. He made space for thousands of us to follow. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, how showing up even when you don't think you'll win, how it can change everything. And it's easy to think of politics as something happening far, far away by people in suits making speeches behind closed doors. But the truth is that politics can happen in the smallest of moments. It's a ballot filled out on a kitchen table. It's a conversation with a friend who's unsure about voting. It's a local race that no one's paying attention to, but will decide who funds your neighborhood projects or your local health clinic. Politics happens when we care enough to keep showing up. And lately, I've been having my own little moments of feeling like it's all just too much. When social media headlines feel heavy and the same fights keep circling back, then I remember someone before me fought for my rights to exist openly. Someone before them fought just to whisper the truth of who they were. And here we are now, a rainbow wave of people who not only look like us, but legislate with us in mind. And that's not nothing. That's progress. It's slow and stubborn, but it's beautiful progress. And so when I hear someone say, I'm not voting, it doesn't matter, I take a moment, and then I say to them that they are wrong, because I remember the pride that my mom had when she voted. I remember Harvey Milk's hope. I remember Andrea Jenkins' courage, Tammy Baldwin's quiet strength. I think of all the people who refuse to sit out, because every time one of us steps forward to vote, to volunteer, to run for office, we make the world just a little more accepting, a little more kinder, and a whole lot more human. And maybe that's the point, that progress doesn't come from perfection. It comes from persistence, from choosing over and over to believe that our voices still matter because they do. Thank you for joining me as we looked at queer politics through history. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you can keep seeing all the videos that I post. You can also see some more queer history by clicking this little video popping up right over here, which is really fun. You can also go to myqueerbirthday.com and see other icons and events that happened on your birthday. The link is down in the description below. Until next time, stay strong, stay bold, and keep making history.